Hi, everyone. Welcome to my TED Talk. I'm really excited to be with you here today, and I'm especially excited to share my story with you all and discuss this topic, which I believe to be really vitally important. The first thing that I want to preface is that I've always wanted to do a TED Talk. My whole life, I've always wanted to do one. And I told myself that if I ever had the opportunity to give a TED Talk, ever, I would talk about the story of how I became a leader and how I grew and evolved as a person through that process. So, I want to take you back about 7 years, almost 7 years on the dot, give or take a few months, to when I first arrived at college. A couple of weeks ago, a few friends of mine sent me this picture of the four of us outside the school I went to. I went to a school called Wheaton College in Norton, Massachusetts, which is a very rural area of the state. Most people, some people even who live in the state, don't know where exactly it is. And in the course of telling this story, I always have to iterate that when I went into college, I knew before going in, that it was going to be a very unique and very transformational experience. And that it was. When I went into college, I experienced in the course of my first year, my freshman year, an arsonist in one of my dorms who was trying to burn the building down. I experienced friend group drama, which culminated in me actually ghosting, which I almost never do, the leader of the group who I had befriended, as well as dealing with the regular pings and pangs of dealing with new roommates and being in a dorm. And it all culminated in one night in the spring when I was having a really bad dream in my dorm room, and I literally rolled myself out of bed, slammed down on the ground, and I woke up both of my roommates in the middle of the night. So yes, the first year at Wheaton was a really wild experience, and I'll always remember it for being just that, a really, really transformational and really wild experience. But I remember my RA, who was on my floor my first year, dealing with all of our craziness, and in the midst of this mayhem, she approached me one day because she was trying to find people to be RAs. And at the time, I went in and I was like, there's no way that I'm going to want to do this job. I thought of like all the movies and TV shows I'd seen where RAs were like these gigantic narcs and they've got people in trouble and everybody hated them. But she recommended me for the job. And I was planning on actually rooming with my best friend at the time, who was a student in another dorm, and he was going to come back for the next year, but he didn't come back. And so I was like, well, I don't want to go through the whole rodeo of looking for a random roommate again. I want to go ahead and have a single, so I applied to be an RA. They put me on a floor of first year students the following year, the fall, where I moved in. And I went in saying that this was going to be really my moment. The spotlight was on me, and it had never been on me before. And so I came onto the floor, and within the first few weeks, something really profound started happening. I made genuine friends with most of the people who lived on my residence hall, which isn't a remarkable sounding thing to do. But when you think about it, it's hard oftentimes in a position of power, particularly one such as an RA role, to really distinguish yourself and make connections with the people who are around you and who you govern and supervise and whatnot. But we became really tight. And to this day, I am best friends with a lot of the people on that floor. We had a lot of success that year. We had a lot of success as our building, as our floor, as our team, and we continued to up the ante with each success that we have. It really felt like this tide was turning, and all of a sudden that really shy kid who stepped into Wheaton wasn't so shy anymore. And so with that process, I returned the following year when I was a junior to be an RA, and I was dead set to do the same thing. I prioritized human connection at the core of my leadership style, of how I communicated with people. I didn't just know the guy down the hall in passing. I knew where he was from. I knew who he was friends with, what he studied, what he did, what he wanted to do when he got out of Wheaton. And we had all these very genuine interactions on the floor and bonded together as a family. As I moved along in my leadership career, I was a lead RA, and I remember talking to my supervisor, and she said, you really need to look into the relational leadership model. And I'd never heard of it before. I said, I think a lot of people probably hearing this don't know what that is. And she directed me towards a study that had been done, multiple academic studies, that had essentially marked that having strong relationships is actually the key to being a successful leader. The more you are motivated by those relationships, the more you feel like the people that you are working for and that you are working alongside are your friends, the higher the rates of success your team will experience. And at first I was kind of baffled by this as well. I didn't know if this was a real thing. But as I started reaching into it and looking it up, I discovered that there was a massive body of work revolving around relational leadership and how vital relational leadership is to the success of any team or any organization. And so that was a really, really significant moment for me, because I realized that all this work that I had been doing was actually something that was real and that had been documented and people had seen and explored before. And that gave me a great rush of, I now know what I want to do with my life. I know that I want to lead. I know that I want to build great relationships in the interim, and I want to use those relationships to propel our team towards success. Flash forward to my first year working in my first professional role as a hall director. And that first year had some bumps in the road. And as I look back on it, it wasn't my most successful year because I wasn't actually as invested in the people who I was working with on a personal level. It got a little bit better last year, and then this year has been a completely different story. Very close with all of my team. I know them all very, very well. We all like each other. We have a natural, comfortable rapport, and it's been a really great experience, a privilege even, to watch and witness this all unfold in real time. So why do I care about this? Why should you care about this? Relationship building is literally the core of a team's success. If you are an unsuccessful team, if you are an unmotivated team, if you are a team who is stuck in neutral and you cannot gas it forward, it is due, likely in part, to not having good relationships. I'll pose a question your way. Would you rather work and do work for someone who's a boss, who you don't really know, or someone who's sort of more closely resembles a friend, somebody who can hold you accountable and keep those boundaries ethically in place within the professional context, but who you feel comfortable with, who you open up to, who you connect with? It's this dynamic that propelled so many of my teams and is continuing to actively, as we speak, propel my team towards great success. And this is why I purport that the relational leadership model is the most vital form of leadership and guiding people within an organization. If you need any help with it, you can Google the relational leadership model. You can find an article, which I read last night from Georgia State University, which cites all kinds of statistics, and I will include it in this presentation as well, about why having strong relationships statistically leads to better outcomes and higher team performance rates. It's a very cool study. It's a very interesting study, and it ties back to that dynamic of we feel connected, we feel bonded emotionally, and therefore we're going to be more successful. So at the root of all that work is really just a bond that you have with the other people. The journey that we're talking about here also ran parallel to me personally. Me being a very shy, more introverted person when I stepped into the role versus who I am now, who is an extreme extrovert, who will socialize and talk with just about anybody. It pushed me out of the shell that I was in before. And it's this dynamic, this notion of relational leadership that has really shown me the value of how great it is when interpersonal relationships are at the core of the work you're doing. So I'll leave you with this. I'll leave you this question to think about while you're meandering what I've talked about here. If the data won't convince you, if what you have heard anecdotally in this talk won't convince you, that is okay. It's a hard thing to sometimes sell people on. But I would go back to that original question of, would you rather be governed by somebody who is just a boss or somebody who you respect and care about? Thank you for your time, and I really appreciate you watching my TED Talk.